Okay, so these are some of the questions that Jim sent me and you. So were the students talking about or worried about the war before the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Not necessarily. There was no groundswell or feeling that something was going to happen. No, not a bit.
So what was the attitude on campus in like 1940, 41?
It was kind of an awareness that all the things that were going on around but far away from us, and we were in my case we were new to university life, so we were probably focusing more heavily in that area than world situation.
Mm-hmm. How did you hear about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
We had just returned from an initiation period with the fraternity. That was a time when we had pledged to fraternities and as sophomores, and as part of the indoctrination into the fraternity, why they had all kinds of things. What they would send you out on a wild goose chase here, there, and everywhere, and so on. Well, hazing. And we had just gotten back from in about maybe 10 or 11 o'clock at night, after having chased some non-existent target, and we got back to the fraternity house, and the radio was on, and it was describing this attack on Pearl Harbor. Everybody just was dumbfounded. I mean, everybody kind of just sat down where they were and looked at each other and looked at the radio, and just in a complete amazement that this was happening.
So then what was it like after that on campus? Now that everybody was at war, I mean, were the students enlisting left and right, or?
Not necessarily, no. Mostly that next day was quiet. People in very just kind of wonderment, trying to, is this real? Did this really happen? I couldn't believe it. And yet, as it sank in, why, yes, and then the feeling was, what do I do now? And people weren't necessarily running around to try to enlist, but they were kind of figuring out, is there a possibility that I can stick around and finish college before I get called up? Because everybody had that feeling rather quickly that they were going to be involved somehow. So either selective service or volunteer, one way or another. This is what their near-time future held for them.
You mentioned to me the program that was kind of once you got your draft notice, it was a deferment. If you were in these certain fields of study, they would prefer you to stay in school and finish your degree.
Yes.
Did that have an actual name or anything like that?
It did have a name, and Professor
Estabrooks?
Estabrook, right. He had a list of people in his psych classes that were involved somehow or other. I can't remember the name of the program, but it had to do with selective programs that were deemed to have some importance, I guess, because